All right, welcome everyone. Let's kick off our deep dive. Today, we're going to be exploring early European exploration and colonization of the
A
Americas.
massive topic, for sure.
Yeah, definitely a lot to unpack. We're going to be looking at excerpts from this fascinating book, right?
Hmm.
It tackles the whole idea of the discovery of America. But get this, from different European perspectives.
Multiple voices, multiple viewpoints. It really adds a whole new layer of complexity to the story.
Exactly. So be prepared for, like, tales
Yeah.
of adventure. Oh, and conflict, of course.
Can't forget the conflict.
And who knows, maybe some surprises along the way.
Oh, there are definitely some surprises in store.
So one of the first things that jumped out at me was like how these early European accounts just gush about the Americas. They were
Yeah.
just blown away by the sheer size and like the population density compared to Europe and Asia.
Right, like it was this incredible revelation for them.
It really makes you wonder, it's like, how did that initial like awe and wonder transform into, well, everything that came after?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? The book does a great job of making you think about how those initial perceptions like shifted so dramatically.
Yeah.
Those early accounts actually challenged the later colonial narratives that we often hear, the ones
Hmm.
that painted the New World as this primitive and empty land ready for the taking,
Yeah, just ripe for the taking.
right? But it was anything but empty.
Definitely not empty.
No.
So speaking of those early perceptions, like, where did people think Native Americans actually came from? The book dives into some origin stories.
It acknowledges right away that it's tricky territory, because we don't have those indigenous written records.
Right.
But there are some really intriguing theories in there.
Oh, for sure.
For example, one suggests that migrations after the biblical flood could have led to people settling in the Americas.
Wow. I mean, talk about a journey, right? Okay, so let's talk about Amerigo Vespucci.
Okay.
His expeditions are just jam-packed with these like super vivid details, right?
Yeah.
He talks about encountering indigenous people in Paria, and they were living in houses on stilts with drawbridges.
I mean, how cool is that?
It's wild.
Hmm.
And then he mentions bartering for gold and pearls, which, I mean, honestly, it sounds like something straight out of like an adventure movie.
Right. It's like an early Indiana Jones, but with a much darker twist.
Okay, what kind of twist are we talking about here?
Well, Vespucci encounters this island community, and they're only willing to trade one thing, prisoners.
Prisoners. Okay, what were they doing with prisoners?
Well, let's just say they had a rather gruesome purpose in mind.
Wait a minute. Are you talking about cannibalism?
Unfortunately, yes.
Wow. Okay, that definitely throws a wrench into things.
Mhm.
Like it goes against any kind of, simple labels we might have about indigenous cultures.
Exactly. It's a reminder to approach history with nuance.
Right.
Vespucci's story is just one example of how complex and often contradictory these intercultural encounters could be.
Absolutely. Okay, well, speaking of complex, let's jump into the clash of empires. The Spanish conquest of the Inca Empire is just like a prime example of how things got, well, messy.
Oh, yeah,
The story of Guafcar is, it's a real eye-opener.
it is. So here's a guy who went to the Spanish for help against his brother Atahualpa, right?
Wow.
Thinking he could, like, play the game.
Manipulate the system.
Exactly. And then what happens? He ends up betrayed and executed.
It's just tragic.
Right. It really makes you question any assumptions about, clear-cut heroes and villains in history.
Yeah, there's so much gray area, right? It's a good reminder that even those who try to like manipulate the system can end up as victims of it.
Totally.
But it wasn't just in South America where things got brutal.
Mm.
The book straight up calls Florida a bloody stage
Yeah.
because of the violence inflicted upon Native Americans,
Yeah.
especially during Ferdinand de Soto's 5-year campaign.
De Soto's actions, I mean, they really highlight the cruelty that often went hand in hand with exploration and conquest. It forces us to, confront the dark side of this period
Yeah.
and the devastating impact it had on indigenous populations.
And it wasn't just the Spanish who faced conflict.
Oh, right.
The book mentions European sailors landing in a new region and they get attacked by the native people.
Immediately.
Yeah. It just goes to show the fear and uncertainty on both sides, you know?
You can almost like feel the tension in that moment, right? It
Yeah.
highlights the dangers that both the explorers and the indigenous people faced. I mean,
Right.
they were navigating this unfamiliar territory. Nobody had a, rule book for this.
It's true. Imagine, like, being in their shoes, landing in a completely unknown place,
Yeah.
not knowing who to trust. Talk about, like, a high-stakes situation.
No kidding. But those high stakes also, led to some incredible stories of survival and adaptation. The book traces those early English settlements in North America, starting with the founding of Jamestown.
Jamestown, yeah.
And then all these other towns popping up around key resources, right? Like salt marshes and timber.
Makes sense. They needed resources.
They weren't just settling randomly,
Right.
They were strategically choosing locations based on practical needs like access to timber for building,
Oh, right.
rivers for transportation. It's a reminder that even in the face of the unknown, like practicality played a huge role.
Yeah. And speaking of practicality, did you know that those early colonists were actually buying fishing hooks? Like, instead of making their own?
Apparently. Even back then,
Exactly.
people appreciated a bit of convenience.
It's funny how some things never change, right? But, okay, beyond those, like, day-to-day realities, the New World must have felt like a whole different planet.
Yeah.
Like, the book describes some incredible creatures that the Europeans encountered.
Oh, yeah. Get ready for some strange ones.
Okay, hit me.
We've got the raccoon. It's this furry critter, lives in hollow trees, and apparently it's delicious.
Delicious, huh? Okay, what else?
And then there's the musquash. They were valued for their musk-producing glands.
Oh, okay.
And then, get this, there's this mythical beast that looked like a horse with cloven feet, a single horn, and a wild boar's tail.
Whoa. Okay, that's an image that definitely sticks with you.
Right. It gives you a sense of how, like, the New World really sparked the European imagination,
Yeah.
blurring those lines between what was real and what was mythical.
Oh, totally. But alongside those, mythical creatures, the book also gets into the nuts and bolts of colonial life, like how they set up their governments.
Right. So they had this whole system with the king at the top, then the governor, and then the General Assembly, which had, upper and lower
A
houses.
mini parliament.
Exactly. And then, of course, they had a judicial system. It's interesting to see how some of those structures are still, recognizable in our systems today.
It really is.
Yeah.
It makes you think about how much has changed and how much has stayed the same.
Right.
But before we go down that rabbit hole, let's shift back to the people who are already here.
Mhm.
I mean, the book paints some really vivid pictures of Native American life. We're talking painted skin, deerskin clothing, elaborate headdresses.
It's a far cry from those stereotypical images you sometimes see, right? And then you have their customs and social structures, everything from fishing with birch bark torches at night to hunting deer using traps and torches.
It's amazing. Talk about ingenuity.
Right. They were incredibly resourceful and adapted to their environment in ways that the Europeans were only starting to, grasp.
Yeah. But as we've seen, the arrival of Europeans brought some immense challenges for these cultures. The book describes the Spanish conquest of, various regions in South America, Mexico, Peru, and it doesn't sugarcoat the destruction and exploitation that came with it.
No, it doesn't. The story of Guacanareo, for example, is it's a poignant example of the devastating consequences of, Spanish greed and oppression.
It's a stark reminder of the human cost of colonialism.
It really is. It's a sobering reminder that these weren't just, abstract historical events. Real people and cultures were profoundly impacted. But even in the face of that adversity, these cultures held on to their beliefs and practices. So let's delve into the religious world of the Aztec and Inca civilizations.
All right, let's do it.
So they had these elaborate rituals, right? Some even involved human sacrifice and a deep reverence for the sun god and other deities. And those religious beliefs were woven into their understanding of the world and their place in it.
It really makes you think about how differently they saw the world, compared to the Europeans.
Oh, absolutely. And that clash of worldviews definitely played a role in the conflicts that arose.
For sure. And speaking of clashes, let's not forget what fueled a lot of this European exploration and conquest in the first place. Good old-fashioned gold and silver. The book highlights how important those precious metals were to the Spanish.
They were obsessed.
It's true.
They extracted vast wealth from mines like the ones in Potosi, and that hunger for riches drove them to incredible lengths.
Yeah. The book mentions a saying, Leguizamo lost the sun before it rose. And it just perfectly captures that obsession with gold. Like they were so focused on striking it rich that they missed out on the beauty and the wonder of the world around them.
It's a reminder that the pursuit of material wealth can sometimes blind you to other, maybe more valuable aspects of life.
It's a good point. But it wasn't just about, getting rich. The book also talks about how the Europeans were constantly looking for new ways to get to the East. And that led to some major discoveries that, changed the course of global trade.
Oh, yeah. We're talking about, the discovery of the Strait of Magellan and later the Strait of Le Maire.
Right. Yeah. Right. These were major breakthroughs.
They open up all these new possibilities for navigation and trade, but they also raise some really big questions.
Like what? What kind of questions?
Well, how did these new routes reshape global trade? Did they ultimately benefit everyone, or did they create new forms of inequality and exploitation?
Those are questions we're still grappling with today. But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, let's shift gears and talk about the Dutch. Specifically, their attempts to get a foothold in Brazil. Their story is full of struggles and setbacks, from battling the Portuguese to dealing with those treacherous waters like the Abrolhos shoals.
And let's not forget about the internal conflicts that plagued their colony, like that infamous Batavia shipwreck and the mutiny led by Hieronymus Cornelis. I mean, talk about a mess.
It's a reminder that even amidst this quest for empire, human nature, with all its flaws and complexities, was still a driving force. And sometimes those flaws led to disastrous consequences, not just for individuals, but for entire settlements.
Right. The book actually describes how many Spanish settlements in the Caribbean eventually declined.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just one thing. It was this combination of factors.
Oh, okay. Like what kind of factors?
Well, you had the depletion of resources, for one. Then the focus shifted to newly discovered mines elsewhere. And of course, there was the devastating impact of European diseases on the native populations.
Wow. It was like a perfect storm of challenges.
It was, and they just couldn't overcome it. It's a stark reminder that even the mightiest empires can crumble when faced with unsustainable practices and unforeseen challenges.
It makes you think about the long-term consequences of colonialism.
Yeah.
And the need to find more sustainable and equitable ways of interacting with the world. Okay, whoa. Take a breath, everybody. We have covered a lot of ground here. We've gone from those wide-eyed first impressions to clashes of empires, the hunt for gold, the harsh realities of colonial life. It's a lot to take in.
It is. So what stands out to you so far? What questions are, swirling around in your mind? Take a moment to process all this information before we continue our deep dive. As we kind of dig deeper into this book, one theme keeps popping up.
Oh, yeah. What's that?
The clash of cultures and those ripple effects that followed.
Right. We've talked about the violence and the exploitation, but there were also some attempts.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. However flawed at understanding and even coexisting.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. It wasn't always just about, conquest. The book mentions English colonists interacting and trading with native populations, learning their customs, even adopting some of their techniques.
Exactly. See, history rarely fits neatly into categories. These encounters involved a whole spectrum of interactions, right? Yeah. Sometimes it was brutal, sometimes it was cooperative, and sometimes it was just plain awkward.
It's true. Kind of like trying to piece together a puzzle,
Yeah.
Where the pieces are scattered across time and continents. And as we gather these, bits of information, we start to see a more complete picture emerge. But there are always going to be those missing pieces.
Always. Speaking of missing pieces, let's look at this one. The relentless European search for new passages to the east.
Oh, yeah. Driven by trade, of course,
yeah,
but also by this insatiable curiosity about the unknown. I mean, can you imagine setting sail into uncharted waters, not knowing what you'd find?
I mean, it took some serious guts, right? And a thirst for adventure that's it's hard to fathom today.
I know. It's like the age of exploration meets early space travel.
Exactly. And just like those early space missions, these voyages were incredibly risky.
Oh, for sure.
We talked about, the Abrolhos shoals that gave the Dutch such a hard time in Brazil, but there were all sorts of dangers lurking beneath the waves.
Oh, yeah. Storms, shipwrecks, hostile encounters. I mean, the journey to the New World was a gamble.
It makes you appreciate how easy we have it today.
Right. With our GPS and weather forecasts, I don't think I'd be cut out for life on a 16th century ship.
Me neither. But amidst those perils, there were also moments of pure awe.
Right.
Remember those incredible descriptions of the New World's flora and fauna?
Oh, yeah. The towering trees, the bizarre creatures, the vibrant colors. It's no wonder those lands captured the European imagination.
It must have felt like stepping into, like, a fantasy novel.
Totally. From the raccoon hiding in hollow trees to that mythical beast with a single horn and boar's tail, those descriptions make you realize how thin the line between reality and fantasy must have felt back then.
It shows that exploration wasn't just about, conquest and riches. It was also about expanding our knowledge, pushing the limits of what we thought was possible, and experiencing the sheer wonder of, encountering something completely new.
I like that. And that sense of wonder wasn't limited to, like, the natural world, right? The book also delves into the social and political structures of indigenous cultures.
Yeah.
Gives us a peek into their, customs and beliefs.
Right. So we see the Aztecs and Incas with their complex rituals and social hierarchies, their profound connection to nature, and their intricate mythologies.
It really challenges those stereotypical images we often get in, popular culture. And their appearance. Forget about, plain buckskins. We're talking painted skin, elaborate headdresses, whole different aesthetic.
It reminds us to check our assumptions at the door, and approach these cultures with respect and curiosity. Their ways of life were different, yeah, but no less sophisticated or meaningful than European cultures.
And their governments. Like, the book describes these intricate networks of power and authority, with chiefs, councils, religious leaders all playing a role.
It's so different from how we typically think about leadership and governance, right?
It makes you wonder how those systems compared to European models.
Right. Were they more or less hierarchical? Do they emphasize consensus or individual power? There's so much to unpack there.
So much to think about.
Yeah.
But we can't ignore the elephant in the room, right? Colonialism.
Right.
The book doesn't shy away from the devastating impact the European arrival had on indigenous populations.
Absolutely. We see the destruction of cities, the exploitation of resources, the spread of diseases, and the forced assimilation of native peoples.
It's a heartbreaking chapter in human history.
It is. It's a stark reminder of the human cost of colonialism and the scars that are still felt today. This isn't, ancient history. It's a legacy that we're still wrestling with.
Yeah, it is. And it's a legacy that demands our attention. As we learn about these events, it's crucial to think about those long-term implications and how we can move forward in a way that acknowledges the resilience and contributions of indigenous peoples.
Exactly. It's not just about, looking back. It's about using that knowledge to build a better future.
And as we strive for that future, let's not forget the lessons we can learn from those early explorers. Their courage, their curiosity, their willingness to, venture into the unknown. Those are qualities we need now more than ever.
We do, but we also need to learn from their mistakes, right?
Oh, absolutely. Their greed, their arrogance, their disregard for the rights and cultures of others, those are cautionary tales about the dangers of unchecked power.
It's a balancing act, isn't it?
It is. We can admire their spirit of adventure while also, condemning the exploitation that so often came with it. It's like holding two opposing ideas in your mind at the same time.
Right. But that's the thing about history. It's full of contradictions.
It's true.
It forces us to confront uncomfortable truths. And to grapple with the complexities of the human experience. There are rarely easy answers.
Nope. And as we dig into those, complexities, remember that history isn't just a collection of dates and names.
Right.
It's a story, a narrative that helps us understand who we are and where we come from. It's a story that we're all a part of, whether we realize it or not.
That's true.
And as we keep learning and re-examining that story, we have a responsibility to think critically about how it's told and how it's remembered.
So as we continue our deep dive, let's do it with open minds and a healthy dose of skepticism. Let's challenge our assumptions and look for, multiple perspectives.
Let's embrace the challenge of, understanding the past, not just for the sake of knowledge, but for the sake of building a better future.
A future where we learn from the mistakes of the past and create a world that values and respects the voices and experiences of all people. Now let's shift gears a little bit and examine the role of religion in all of this. The book points out how religious beliefs shaped European perceptions and actions in the New World.
Oh, yeah. It talks about the different religious beliefs of both the, indigenous populations and the Europeans, highlighting those clashes in worldviews that often led to conflict and misunderstanding.
Right. So you have the Aztecs and Incas with their elaborate rituals and reverence for the sun god.
Right.
And then you have the Europeans arriving with their Christian beliefs. I mean, it's a recipe for tension.
It is. And we can't overlook, how religion was used to justify European actions,
Yes.
from forced conversions to the idea that they were on some divine mission to spread Christianity.
Yeah.
It raises some tough questions about, like, how religion was used to legitimize power and control. How much did those religious differences contribute to the violence and exploitation?
It's a question that's still debated by historians today. And as we dive deeper into this book, we're going to encounter even more complexities and contradictions that challenge our assumptions and broaden our understanding of this era.
We've talked a lot about the Spanish, the English, but we haven't touched on the Dutch much.
Yeah.
They were a huge part of this whole age of exploration.
Oh, yeah, a major player.
And their experience in Brazil, it kind of shows just how complicated this whole colonial thing was.
Definitely messy.
The Dutch, they had big dreams for Brazil,
Oh, they did.
but they faced constant pushback from the Portuguese.
Not to mention those treacherous seas.
Exactly. And then on top of that, they had all this infighting.
Sabotaging their own efforts, basically.
It's like they got hit with a triple whammy.
You could say that.
Their story really shows just how unpredictable and often, unsustainable these colonies were.
It wasn't as simple as just, showing up, planting a flag.
Right. It was way more complicated.
The Dutch pulling out of Brazil, it's a good reminder that empires,
Yeah.
they don't last forever.
Yeah, that hunger for power and control, it often comes with a pretty hefty price tag.
Absolutely.
And speaking of price tags, we can't ignore the economic side of all this.
Of course not.
The book makes it clear that the Europeans, they were driven by this relentless pursuit of resources. Oh yeah, everything from gold and silver to sugar and spices.
It was all about extracting wealth, exploiting resources to, line those European pockets.
We see these huge plantation systems springing up forced labor of the native people.
And the damage to the environment.
It's sobering to think about the cost.
Definitely, both in terms of human suffering and the health of the planet.
And sadly, those patterns of exploitation, they've had a lasting impact.
Leading to a lot of the global inequalities we still see today.
It's a complicated legacy.
So much to unpack.
It really is.
We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive.
We have.
From those first encounters, those cultural clashes,
To the quest for new routes, new resources.
the challenges of governing these new territories,
The role of religion.
and the whole complex legacy of colonialism.
It's been a journey.
It really has. As we wrap up, let's think about the long-term effects of all this.
How did these early encounters shape the world we live in now? What can we learn from this past?
It's clear that the, quote-unquote discovery and colonization of the Americas, it had a huge impact on the course of human history.
It affected global trade, cultural exchange, political systems, social structures.
I mean, everything.
But it's also a history filled with violence, exploitation, displacement of entire populations.
It's not a pretty picture.
We need to acknowledge it, understand it, if we want to create a more just world.
Absolutely. So, as you think about all this, consider how it connects to what's happening in the world right now.
How do these themes resonate with today's issues?
Cultural clashes are the pursuit of power, and resources, the effects of colonialism.
Because history isn't just something that happened in the past.
Right? It's still unfolding.
It's a living narrative. It shapes our present and our future.
We can't ignore those connections.
We can't.
As we face today's challenges, we can learn from what happened before, both the good and the bad.
To create a more informed, compassionate, interconnected future.
Keep exploring, keep asking questions, keep diving deep. Until next time.